wonderful Windsor.
Wonderful town.
Windsor's a wonderful town. You're sure of a welcome in Windsor.
Hello, my name is Mike Evans, and welcome to beautiful historic Walkerville, a town that Hiram Walker built. You can see this large bronze statue of Hiram Walker, and he's got his plans and his blueprints and his drawings under his arm, and he's on his way to build an empire. And that's exactly what Hiram Walker did. Several years ago, I was involved in the production of another documentary about Walkerville. It was called The Manor, a home that shaped a community. That was about Willistead Manor, one of Walkerville's famous residences. It was at that time that we uncovered so much great material. We had film, photographs, maps, insurance diagrams. It was a literal treasure trove. That process really got me interested in learning more about Walkerville, the town that whiskey built. There are so many historic gems, some of which are now long gone, but others that have survived and are still around today. On this location, there used to be the Peabody Bridge. Right here where we're standing was the Flatiron Building. Across the way here was the original malt house for the Hiram Walker Distillery. Please join me as I explore some of the treasures of Walkerville and share some of my favorite stories about the town that Hiram Walker built. Several years back, while working on a documentary about Willistead Manor, I came across some old 8mm film footage of the demolition of a building in Walkerville. The film footage is from the very early 1970s and shows the demolition of a unique-looking warehouse structure. Based on the footage, the building stood on Riverside Drive close to Walker Road. This bit of footage inspired me to do a deep dive into the history of Walkerville and specifically the heart of the Hiram Walker's Distillery district. I studied old maps, insurance diagrams, like this one, and photographs to do a deep dive into some of the long-gone buildings of Hiram Walker's, as well as a few that are still standing. A sweep east up Riverside Drive, or Sandwich as it was known back then, and we land on the building in question, the one being demolished in the old film. This first diagram is from 1884. Here's a bird's eye view of the building, and we can see that it was labeled as Building 6, the Rectifying and Still House. And here it is again in this photograph from 1899. A pan across the photo shows a very good vantage point of the Hiram Walker's Railroad, better known as the Lake Erie and Detroit River Railway. I've heard that this is the one and only photograph of Hiram Walker's Railroad. Note the church steeple, that's the original St. Mary's Church. Here's an even older insurance map, this one from 1880. These Sanborn insurance maps give wonderful bird's eye vantage points of the district at that time, and they detail building and street names. Here's a look at that same area today. According to the 1890 diagram, the rectifying house stood right at the foot of Walker Road. As you can see, the rectifying still house is very distinctive, with the 3 large doors and the 2 rows of 6 large windows across the front, at the heart of the Hiram Walkers & Sons operations. Along with the rectifying house, I'm going to be exploring some of my other favorite structures from the Gilded Age of Walkerville. This is the Père Marquette Walkerville train station. This unique structure was a centerpiece of downtown Walkerville. The Walkerville train station was demolished in 1957. Luckily, someone was there with a camera to capture some photographs of the demolition. From the photos, it appears that the structure was demolished by hand. It really looks like this worker is wearing a sports jacket. This shot of the train station shows the Queen Victoria Fountain, which was moved to Willistead Park in the late 1950s. The ornate fountain spouted forth water for the people of Walkerville to drink. Note the large stone horse trough in the photo. I've read that the horse trough was removed in the 1930s, but let's take a look at some of the more modern photos of the fountain. And what is that? And there it is again. And on the cover of musician Lee Amlin's 1987 I Wanna Hold You, we can see what looks like the horse trough. I had to know if the stone trough was still there today, so I went and had a look. And to my surprise, it is still there. Amazing that the stone horse trough has survived this long, 127 years and counting. The Walkerville Queen Victoria Fountain, one of my favorite landmarks. It really says a lot about the history of this region. Hiram Walker's sons bought this. Actually, Hiram would have been alive at the time, but they bought this and dedicated it for the townsfolk of Walkerville, a place for people to come and have a drink. It's too bad they no longer spout forth water, because I wouldn't mind filling up my container here. These are pretty ornate too. Albert Kahn designed this. Just another thing in Walkerville that Albert Kahn had a hand in. On the June 1897 fountain dedication photo, notice that it's not the actual fountain that they are dedicating. It's a mock-up of the fountain, and notice on the top we can see the fountain's signature crown topper. You can see that the crown adorned the peak of the fountain for many years. By the late 1950s, when they moved the fountain, the crown was already gone, and the copper roof was in tatters. Look down here to the lion head fountain. The heads were all still there in the late 1950s. Over the years, the copper roof deteriorated and the crown disappeared from the peak. In 1958, the fountain was relocated to the gardens behind Willistead Manor. Here's an early photo of the fountain in Willistead Park, and you can see that the crown is long gone. But so is the lion head fountain, here in 1989, and still no sign of the lions. And again in 1991, the fountain's copper roof and the lion's head fountain were restored in the early 1990s, but the crown was never replaced. On the roof, there used to be a crown, but it went missing in the 50s. So that thing's been gone for almost 70 years, and I have no idea where that could have been. It's probably long gone. But wouldn't it be cool if we could take these old photos that we have and we could mock up a 3D rendering and then have somebody print off a 3D version of the crown? We could attach it to the top of the fountain and have it there. Or failing that, we can move it into the museum that's over there in the carriage house. In this insurance map from 1890, we can see a wooden water tower erected along what was then Sandwich Street. And in this very early photo of Sandwich Street, later Riverside Drive, you can see the same water tower. Not a car in sight, but we can see what appears to be a horse and buggy and some men working on the side of the road. Okay, this is the original St. Mary's Church, built by Hiram Walker for his wife Mary in 1870. Mary Abigail Walker died in 1872 at the age of 45. There are only a few surviving photographs of the original St. Mary's Church, which was destroyed by a fire and then razed in 1904. Hiram and Mary's surviving sons built another church in honor of their parents. This second St. Mary's Church was completed in 1904 and is still standing just north of Willistead Manor. I've always loved this photo of the church from 1904. You can see a couple and a young girl touring the worksite of the church. There's clearly construction still going on, but no sign of the workers. Maybe it was a Sunday. At the far right of the photo, right around where Willistead now stands, is a billboard advertising Walkerville Lager beer. Sadly, part of the sign is cut off, so we can't make out all of what is written. This is St. Mary's Church behind us. It was built by Hiram Walker's sons in 1904, and this has always been a huge part of the community of Walkerville, was this church, and it kind of goes right along with Willistead and the architectural design of Willistead, made to resemble an old countryside village in England, which was the style at the time. This is another place that I always bring people who are visiting Windsor to this church and show them, look at this, this is something beautiful that we have. And it looks a lot older than it actually is. St. Mary's. 100 years ago, they didn't really have that many street signs, and they went as far as stenciling in the name of the street on the corners in Walkerville so you could see the name of the street when you were walking. And it's a fun little game you can play walking down the streets of old Walkerville, and you can still see remnants in the cement. So it just tells you how old this cement is. It's been around for a very long time. Before the introduction of the automobile, the Detroit River was the region's highway. And the riverfront by the Hiram Walker Distillery District was a busy place with traffic from all over the Great Lakes. One of the early Walkerville ferry boats was the Ariel. And while I was looking at photos from the turn of the century, I kept seeing photos of the Ariel. Built in 1881, the Ariel was the first ferry built specifically for the Walkerville-Detroit Ferry Company. Here's another interesting Walkerville building that is now long gone. It's the Flatiron Building. It was not owned by the Walker family and contained 7 individual business units on the main floor and offices and flats on the second and third floors. The Flatiron Building was built in 1895, a bustling downtown Walkerville at the intersection of Sandwich and Devonshire. Here's a shot of the Flatiron in 1907. Fun fact, this little girl is Camilla Stodgel-Weigel, standing in front of her parents' confectionery store. Camilla lived to be 107 years old, making her Windsor's oldest resident at the time. I wonder if the lady in black was a widow, or perhaps a chaperone. I love seeing the large fancy hats on almost everyone, certainly all of the ladies. Could it be that they're all waiting for the streetcar? While we were making our documentary about Willistead Manor, we came across a photo album from 1900. The photos depict a lawn bowling tournament that took place at Hiram Walker's that same year. Also, some very interesting, never-before-seen photos of the Distillery district and the buildings of the era. Can you imagine if Windsor still had this one-of-a-kind gem? It would have been the backdrop in at least 100 movies by now. A rare photo of the Flatiron Building as seen from behind. Here's a photo of the Flatiron Building in the early 1990s, shortly before it was demolished. From a sad demolition to one that was long overdue, the Peabody Bridge. From the 1880 insurance map, we can see that the bridge was made from wood at that point. The Peabody Bridge was never designed for automobile traffic. It was just too narrow, and as a result, there were lots of accidents there over the years. The bridge was also notoriously treacherous during the winter when ice formed. The bridge had a poor reputation with several generations of Windsorites, but it somehow persevered through the decades. The Peabody Bridge was finally demolished in 1993. A pan across the Detroit River starting with Belle Isle in the 1960s, and you can see that at that point the rectifying house was still there, but not the smaller building that had been just west of it. And this is the oldest insurance diagram that I came across during my research. It's the Distillery district from the 1870s. So by the time that Hiram Walker's and Sons had the rectifying warehouse demolished in the early 1970s, the building was already at least 100 years old. Here's a sketch of the district from 1885. I'm curious to know how the artist was able to visualize the waterfront from above. Back to the early 1970s, and the rectifying warehouse is in the midst of being demolished. At that point, it was at least 100 years old. It was a very old building at that point and was probably considered an eyesore and demolished in the name of progress. Just imagine having this building and that beautiful facade today. For any amateur history detectives like me, here's a really easy clue that helps date old photos and film. If there's a Canada flag depicting a maple leaf in the photo or footage, you can guarantee that the shots are from after 1965. Back in 1910, the building was in its glory. Walkerville was at its peak, and ivy had taken over many of the walls of the district, including the headquarters. These were the years that followed Hiram's death in January of 1899, when the distillery was still being run by his sons. It appears like the entire district was immaculately manicured. I always enjoy looking at photos from that era, and so many details appear in the photos. There in the background is the rectifying warehouse, and some train cars waiting to be loaded. If you're like me and you like looking at old photos and postcards from the region at the turn of the century, you may have noticed the name Pesha keeps popping up. Louis Pesha is a very well-known postcard photographer from the turn of the century. Pesha would scratch his name into the photo negatives, thus giving himself an early watermark on all of his images. Because Walkerville was so prestigious at the time, Pesha traveled to the area to take postcard photos, so you can see a numbering system as well.
It appears that all of Pesha's Walkerville photos are numbered in the high 3000s to the early 4000s. Of course, Pesha photographed Willistead Manor. Image 4020 of the Willistead grounds is interesting. Was Louis Pesha standing in the manor when he took this photo? It looks like it. Here is the only known photograph of Louis Pesha, taken while he photographed the big boats as they passed by on the river. Louis Pesha died at 44 years of age in an accident while operating his steam-powered automobile.
I think about Pesha coming here to take his photographs of all the streetscapes of Walkerville. Did he come by steamship? Did he have a horse and buggy with him? It was a little bit early for him to have an automobile with him, but did he haul all of his gear through Walkerville, going from place to place, taking his iconic photograph photos? How many photos did he take over that day? Or was it a couple days? There's so many questions, and all of the negatives, everything that he did is lost now. We're lucky to have what we do have because they were massively produced postcards at the time. But funny, back then at the turn of the century, this was such an iconic place that Pesha made a trip here just to take pictures of the houses. And these houses still are very special. Just look at it. Look at our surroundings. It's really, really remarkable, some of these one-of-a-kind homes.
Probably my favorite historical Walkerville building is this one, the cottage. The cottage had originally served as the Walker family home in the 1850s while Hiram got the distillery going. It had been the Labadie farmhouse, having belonged to the original French settlers. Again, it's the photos from the lawn bowling tournament in 1900. You can see some really nice images and angles of the cottage in the background. You can see from the photos that the cottage grew with additions over the decades. The cottage even had its own indoor bowling alley. Later on, the cottage was home to Edward and Mary Walker after they were wed in 1896. It is this photo of the cottage that is my personal favorite. This photograph served as a Rosetta Stone of sorts for us when we were making the Willistead Manor documentary. My colleague Jordan was studying the original photo as we were scanning it and noticed some faint writing on the front. The photograph was labeled, but what did it say? We were able to scan the entire image and decipher to our best ability the set of names written on the picture. It reads, Walkerville Cottage, Miss E.C. Walker, Miss Sibley, myself with pet. The identification of Miss E.C. Walker, Mary Walker, was huge because it allowed us to now identify Mary Walker in several other photos from the collection. This photo, for instance. This is the wedding photo of Ella Walker to Count Manfred von Matuschka in 1897. We were able to identify Mary Walker standing right out front. People doubted that this was Mary because her husband Edward was not in the photograph. However, after scanning the original and punching in a little, you can see that Edward is indeed in the photo, but just the top half of his face. And look here, this lady, who I have yet to identify, is the other woman from the cottage photo, the one who labeled the names. I'm guessing that she is a relative of the Walker clan. In this photo from 1897, we can see Edward and Mary at the dedication of the Queen Victoria Jubilee Fountain. Here again, we see Mary Walker in profile. This photo here is of Mary. It was dug up from a time capsule buried at the dedication of King Edward's School in Walkerville. And here from the lawn bowling album, again, members of the Walker clan show up in the image. Is that the mystery woman again? And there with her, Harrington Walker, Hiram's grandson. There's Edward James Harrington and another one of Hiram's grandsons, Harrington's younger brother, Hiram Holcomb Walker, with his arm resting on the knee of a lady. Perhaps another image of Mary Walker. One of my favorite details in this image of the cottage is not the cottage itself, but the road in front. Riverside Drive, then called Sandwich Street, was paved with cedar blocks. Because the Walkers were so wealthy, there was no way that Edward and Mary were going to continue to live in the cottage. It took up a valuable piece of real estate right in the heart of the Distillery district, so Edward and Mary decided to build a stately manor home close by.
We're standing on the location, the exact location where the Walker cottage stood. It was torn down in 1906 after Edward and Mary moved out and they moved into their brand new Willistead Manor. And this is one of my favorite locations of that photograph that was labeled with Mary Walker's name. The cottage was razed, obviously, and this is the building that replaced it, and it's still standing here today.
The residence that they built would eventually be called Willistead Manor. This image of Willistead from a 1907 edition of Country Life in America was taken within a year of the manor's completion in 1906, making it perhaps the oldest surviving photo of Willistead. One thing that has always stood out to me about Willistead is the trees and the landscaping. Because there were so many trees planted on the grounds early on, now, all these years later, the park still has some amazing tree cover. At various times over the decades, the park was flooded so neighborhood children could skate there in the winter. Here are some very rare images of children skating in the park in the 1950s. Check out how many trees there are. Look closely, you can see Willistead's iconic fence in the background. Even now, the tree cover in Willistead Park is so substantial that it is very common to see screech and great horned owls using it as habitat.
Amazing with all the different trees here, it really is. And these trees are old. Some of these trees are well over 100 years old. They've been here for that long. Now we've got a little mini forest right here in the heart of Walkerville. I was always curious to know the story behind this hill. Why is there a hill in the middle of Willistead Park? And some of the locals described to me that it's because when they made Willistead, they dug out the basement for the foundation and for everything down there, and they needed to put the ground somewhere, so they just put it over here, and here's where it stayed.
Here's artist Michael Hayden driving up to the Willistead Art Gallery in his brand new Citroën in March of 1969. I was able to track down the artist Michael Hayden at his home in California and connected with him over the telephone. Then I was able to send him some of the Willistead Art Show footage. Here's Hayden's reaction to seeing the over 50-year-old footage for the first time.
It's amazing seeing my hair at the time that it was that full and that dark. I still have a full head of hair, but it turned gray and now it's turned white. This is the danger of growing older.
It's got to be my favorite door in the city of Walkerville, city of Windsor. It's just so ornate and large. You just don't see other doors like this. And the fact that it's been here for 120 years and little has changed with it. It's still the original door. See the handle. You can see there used to be a screen door there. It's been long gone over here as well. I just love the idea of thinking about all the important people that have passed through this door over the years. Prime ministers, world famous artists, scholars, poets, thousands of brides and grooms, students when it used to be a library. This is kind of a funny detail. It's the original doorbell, and it says press on it because when this came out, I imagine doorbells hadn't been around for that long, so the general public still had to know that, yes, you do in fact have to press that to make a sound.
When we were working on the Willistead documentary, I made it my mission to comb through local antique stores, junk stores, anywhere where I could find old photographs, old maps, but especially old film. I began to find film cans right away in the 16 and 8mm formats. It was at this time that I first became aware of Windsor filmmaker, cameraman, and technician Charlie Fox. Mr. Fox had passed away in 2016 at the age of 91. Charlie had been a lifelong Walkerville resident. And since he was into film and camera equipment, he had accumulated literally tons of material at his home. Charlie had no family, and upon his death, many of his possessions ended up getting sold or were given away. Among the items given away were dozens and dozens of canisters of 16mm film. After he died, all of his films were sold at his estate sale and were spread out around town at different antique shops. I began to actively scour the city for everything that Charlie Fox had ever filmed. The collection spans Charlie's career as a freelance cameraman and producer. Since Charlie had lived in Walkerville his entire life, I knew that he would have shot some Walkerville materials over the decades. And maybe he shot some Willistead footage, which is what I was really looking for. Argyle Road, Charlie's Street. When I saw this sign, I knew we were getting close.
This way, Gilwell.
It didn't take long before I started to see glimpses of Willistead. And here you can see part of St. Mary's Church when it was covered in ivy. And then it happened. Pay dirt. A shot up Kildare Road revealing a bustling Willistead Park. It was art in the park. Here's an old Windsor joke. How do you guarantee rain on the weekend? Schedule art in the park. Charlie shot this footage in the early 1970s. My hunch had been correct. Charlie Fox indeed had footage of Willistead and Willistead Park. The fact that this footage was shot during one of the inaugural Art in the Parks made this footage even more historically significant. Check out the kid on the tricycle. I studied this footage very closely, hopeful and half expecting to see glimpses of my parents or grandparents strolling through the shots. And here's a coincidence. It turns out that Charlie Fox's parents worked as caretakers at Willistead Manor. There's even a series of letters from Mary Walker to Charlie's mother.
This is where Charlie Fox lived, here on Argyle Road. So a lot of the movies that he makes are kind of filmed outwardly from his home around these streets in Walkerville. You see all the stuff that he shot at Willistead Park. You see a fire that happened. He probably woke up one morning, smelt smoke, heard sirens. He just grabbed his 16mm film and ran over and was able to capture some really great footage of that Ace paint fire that happened on Walker Road. And then when the blizzard of 1978 happened, he was able to grab his camera. Everybody wasn't going to work that day. Everybody was snowed in, so Charlie picked up his camera. He had a reel of film in it. He hit the streets and filmed some of this area during the blizzard of 78. And we see people snowed in, people digging their cars out. We see traffic passing by in Walkerville on Wyandotte Street. And then even just some really nice shots of the snow-filled streets, people trying to clean it up, trucks trying to get through. The 800 block of Argyle Road. This is Charlie's street, one of the exact locations where he was filming a scene from his 1960s film, Gilwell's Walk, where a young girl named Cindy takes a giant dog. It's a St. Bernard on a walk through the streets of Walkerville. And you can see in his film a lot of the same locations. You see St. Mary's Church, you see this intersection, you see a couple of the houses, and some of the other neighborhood children come out. I just love that movie. It's no real dialogue at all. It's just the dog and the girl walking through the streets, played to classical music. It reminds me of a 1960s era National Film Board film, so maybe that's what Charlie made it for. Other than that, I'm not sure exactly why he made it, other than a really, really highly produced home movie with his neighbor. That young lady was Charlie's neighbor. So them walking through the streets, it's just got a really nice charm about it. And of course, I love it because you get to see all these locations from the middle of the century, 1960s. So that's really cool. Let's take a look around. Maybe we'll see some more interesting things.
1948, St. Mary's Gate. The Harrington E. Walker House was built in 1911 and was also designed by Albert Kahn. Harrington Walker was Hiram Walker's eldest grandson. While living in Walkerville, Harrington had access to a camera and took hundreds of photographs. This home is on the Windsor Municipal Heritage Register, and maybe that's why the home has changed so little since it was built in 1911. Back in downtown Walkerville by the 1890s, Hiram Walker and Sons had outgrown the company's original headquarters. A new one was built, and no expense was spared. The new headquarters opened on September 20th, 1894. This gorgeous structure was drafted by a young Albert Kahn, who would go on to become one of the most prolific architects of the 20th century. There is no shortage of images of the headquarters over the years. This shot here stands out to me because of the car parked out front. Is this car Edward Walker Stevens Duryea car from 1909? If you look close, you can see that there's a man sitting in the car. Perhaps it's the driver waiting for Mr. Walker to take home to Willistead. This shot here is one of my favorites from that era. It's a panorama photograph of the Sons of England convention. It was taken on the back lawn of Hiram Walker and Sons headquarters in around August 10th of 1914. The significance of that date is that it was taken about 1 week after the outbreak of World War I. I wonder if any of these men fought in the war. I found this photo at a local antique shop and knew that I needed to have it for the documentary, but I didn't want to pay $300 for it. That's what it was going for. It was still in the original wooden frame from 1914, and that's why the shop owner wanted so much for it. I was able to make him a deal though. I rented the photo and frame, and we painstakingly took it apart and scanned it section by section, and then stitched it all back together in Photoshop. Not bad, eh? Because I love this photo so much, I'd like to take a minute to show some of the standout details. There is only one person that I recognize in this entire photograph, and again, it's Harrington Walker, Hiram's grandson. And there he is, front and center, sitting on the lawn. Here's how small I have to make the panorama in order to see everyone at the same time. There really is a lot going on in this photograph that I'd like to show you. First of all, the date that the photograph was taken and the names of the photographers. The photo is 90% men, but there are a few ladies in the shot. Look at the face right down the middle. This is the only kid in the shot. It seems to me that a lot of the people are looking in different directions. Mustaches were very popular in 1914. Whenever I'm viewing old photographs like this one, I always fear that I'll see something chilling, like this man's eyes. Maybe the best mustache yet. This is a very British-looking cluster. And another. A lot of these people would have been from out of town from various Sons of England locals. Of the hundreds of people in this photo, not one of them is blinking or blurring. And at the end of the panorama, we can see traces of the Canadian Club sign. This iconic sign was drawn up by Albert Kahn in 1900 and sat on the riverfront in the Distillery district for decades. And you can see it popping up in photographs over the years. These photos were taken in 1959, just prior to Queen Elizabeth's visit to Windsor. Here's a Windsor Star article from Wednesday, August 10th, 1960, when the sign was finally taken down. Here are some photos from the lawn bowling tournament in 1900. That sign would have been brand new at that point. And here's another shot of the ferryboat Ariel pulling up to dock. Lawn bowling was a very big deal around the turn of the century. Notice all of the American flags all around the property. I imagine that a lot of the lawn bowling teams were from the US. Another way to date older photos is to count the stars on the American flag. Before 1908, there were only 45 stars. Look, a young boy on his bicycle stopped by to watch the match from Devonshire Road. The large brick structure in the background is the malt house. Some great images from the lawn bowling tournament with the malt house looming in the background. The insurance diagram shows just how close the malt house was to the cottage. Notice that there are two different colors in the Sanborn insurance maps. The red buildings are made from brick, whereas the yellow ones are made from wood. These lawn bowling photos also give us a great view of what ship traffic was like on the Detroit River back in 1900. Here are the winners of the lawn bowling tournament. And here are some of the prizes. Very nice. I love how many different styles of hats are in this photo. And look closely, here's Edward Walker posing with the participants of the tournament. Flash forward 7 decades and the rectifying house is just about history. One of the last remaining buildings from the time of Hiram Walker himself being cleared in the name of progress. When we look back now, the buildings like Willistead, the Second St. Mary's Church, the headquarters, and a few other homes are really all that remain from the Gilded Age of Walkerville. The rectifying warehouse, the train station, the malt house, the Flatiron building, the cottage, they're all gone. All that remains are a handful of old photos and diagrams. These photos capture a moment in the distant past, and in this case of the Hiram Walker's headquarters, that building is still there for all of us to see and appreciate. And there is so much to see in these old photographs. Zooming around this shot, I noticed something very funny. Look closely on the windowsill. It's a piece of cookware. I imagine that the person who placed it there was waiting for the contents to cool off before they ate. It's little things like that small detail that make these photographs so interesting. Oh, but wait, one other building did somehow manage to survive the wrecking ball. The Walkerville Town Hall, which was built in 1904, was originally located across the street from the headquarters. The town hall was also designed by Albert Kahn and was erected on the foundation of the First St. Mary's Church. The building was almost demolished in the mid-1990s, but was saved and then moved around the corner to Devonshire Road, where it still stands. The saving of the old Walkerville Town Hall was really just the beginning of the idea that we didn't have to tear everything down in the name of progress. Old buildings and facades could be utilized and appreciated by future generations. Their one-of-a-kind appearance and charm is something that cannot easily be replicated. That's one very confused pigeon.
Thank you for joining me on this journey through historic Walkerville. I thought it would be fitting to end here at the Canadian Club Brand Center, one of the last remaining buildings from the time of Hiram Walker himself. But we still have work to do. That's why I like making movies like this one, so we can dredge up people's memories and bring old film, old photos, old video, and old audio to the forefront, so people like me can keep making documentaries like this one. So we can keep bringing history back to life and remembering some of the amazing things that have happened in this community and advocating for our past and at the same time looking towards our future.
Back to the Queen Victoria Diamond Jubilee photo, and one last opportunity to scan through this fantastic picture. This photo captures a candid look at hundreds of Walkerville citizens in 1897. There's Mary Walker, Edward Walker, Thomas Reed, who was the mayor of Walkerville at the time, delivering a speech. Here's an official from the train station holding a speech. A group of bored soldiers leaning on their rifles. Up here we have an amazing view of the Walkerville Fire Department, their fire wagons pulled by teams of horses. I love the sleeves on this lady's blouse. Hiram Walker was still alive in 1897 and may be in this shot somewhere. Some people are aware of the cameraman, but most are not. This photograph perfectly captures a moment in time from 127 years ago. And I'll end with one of my favorite details, a sleeping dog.
Wonderful Windsor,
Wonderful town.
Windsor's a wonderful town. You're sure of a welcome in Windsor. Windsor's a wonderful town.
With lots of friendly people who will treat you equal, not the kind of folks who put you down.
So if you're a bullet or to come see, or shopping on Ottawa Street, there's one thing you know, that wherever you go, the atmosphere can't be beat.